Hey guys, what's up? Misha from GGD here, and today I'm very excited to run you through a mix walkthrough that I did of an old bulb tune called Ultimatum. I have it open right here. I should tell you one thing. I got a new computer. I've been on a Mac system. I got the M2 Studio, and it has wreaked a little bit of havoc. So I've had to rebuild some stuff. If you're familiar with Cubase and on an M2, maybe you can relate to some of my suffering here, because I cannot use any of my VST2 plugins. So I've had to sort of adapt this to a new mix, but I got this in a good place, and it's kind of cool. We can run through the entire mix. I think I got it sounding really good, maybe better than the actual demo that I uploaded. Just goes to show, when you have another opportunity to take a stab at something, right? But if you want to hear what I'm talking about, let's listen to a little bit right now. All right, well, there you go. I said we'll listen to a little bit, but we listened to the whole thing. It's a short idea. So, I mean, this is fun because this is an old, very, very old bulb idea, if you even know what bulb is. But I used to jam around programming drums, making songs in my bedroom, much as I do now. Back in 2006 or something like that, I wrote this, and there's a bit more to it, but shortened it for this little demo recreation. It's all coming full circle because now we're using the GGD P5 kit, which is the most modern thing that we've done. It's something that we captured, well, I should say something that Nolly and Matt captured painstakingly during the P5 sessions. And it is a phenomenal sounding kit. Just a quick aside, this is just kind of a little bit of fun. I normally get a bit of demoitis when we're working on a new album. I don't know if you get that feeling if you're ever writing something and then you re-record it for real. You get so used to the way the demo sounds that anything new, whether it's better or worse, just ends up sounding different, and you kind of have to get used to it. And that's happened for every single album and recording that we've ever had to re-record, let's say with real drums, or just do the final takes, right? This is the first time where that didn't happen. When I heard the drums, that's mainly what I was hearing. I was hearing the performance that Matt put into this, and the tones that Nolly was getting. I was like, this is really special, and I've never had this happen before. It made the demo sound really dull by comparison, and I was so excited to get my hands on this kit as a result, because I was like, man, maybe some of that magic is just the room that was captured in. It was at Real World Studios, sorry, and that is just a fantastic studio, an incredible and very unique drum room. And if you've watched a lot of our walkthroughs, and especially Nolly's walkthroughs, you know how much the room sound really affects the sound of the drums. So, I mean, we have a fantastic kit. There's not a ton of options because it's really just what was used during the actual recording session, But this is, one of the big things is Matt's snare drum. This is his Pearl signature snare, which is phenomenal. This mid tuning is the bread and butter tuning. Now, as with a lot of this stuff, when you have a lot of processing on it, like I do, you probably need to tune not tune, but you need to adjust your mix a little bit for each tuning or whatever. I mean, this would be just as true in real life. So, this is set up for the mid snare, mid tuning. We have these wonderful toms here. I'm actually using a version of the kick that I believe never made it on the album, because this is a Master's Birch. There was a reference. This is just such a big, fat, thuddy click. This one's like kind of clicky, kind of digging what it's doing. And again, I've mixed my mix for this, so the other kick may not sit perfectly, but these are all extremely viable. We've got our various cymbals here, and I don't need to give you an overview because Nolly already did that, but I should mention this. This cymbal is something I've always wanted to have, because, you know, we like having sort of a more traditional ride cymbal that sort of rides and washes and maybe even crashes kind of nicely. But that is completely the opposite kind of cymbal that you need for having that big metal bell sound, right? And that's what we've got this for. I believe it's just like sort of a cut down big bell ride, because you kind of don't need the extra bits. I don't know exactly how it works. I just know it sounds fantastic. We made good use of it on the album, and I am going to make good use of it here. In this song, I don't think there is any ride cymbal, so just kind of bringing that up for fun. But anyways, let's get into some of the mix here, because I've been rambling for long enough. So one of the main things that's happening here that you guys should know about is we are doing multi-out. So I just set up multi-out advanced, and I set up my outputs to sort of correlate with that here. So as you can see, and this is handy. I mean, you could all do it by hand, of course, but since I was sort of starting from scratch with this, I just kind of reverse engineered it to where I made all the channels that was naturally outputting to the correct ones. So, you know, these are all sort of named correctly. As you can see, I just named them after the fact. So overheads, mono room, room 1, room 2. And here, let's just click through the levels so that you can see what I sort of settled on. Now, this is one of those tricky things, because especially when you have things like distortion, you may think like, oh, there's a lot more reverb, a lot more room than is necessary on this kit. Maybe a lot more sustain than should be there. But you got to keep in mind, the guitars really, really eat into that. Like, let's take a little listen. But we had the guitars in, and you realize how everything's just sort of fighting for space. So you need a little bit more. Yeah, you'll see a similar thing with guitars. You always go a little bit brighter than you think you'll need, because when you double track, it loses a little bit of the brightness. So a lot of people dial things in just for what sounds and feels good on a center channel, and it'll end up being kind of woofy and a little bit bassy, and needs a little bit more definition when you actually double track it. These are just the natures of the mix. I mean, if it was that easy, everyone would do it, right? It would be a lot easier on everyone. And I'm no expert here, but I will show you what I came to. And how I approached it. So we've multi-outed everything, the multi-out advanced, and that basically gives you channels for just about everything. Like you can see, the kick has its in and out. The snare has the top and bottom, and these are all feeding in different amounts to the overheads and room, which is pretty handy. Same thing with the toms. We got individual ones here. Then we have like individual mics for the hat, splash, ride. But then there's other things which are just being routed just to the overheads, like the stack. And I'm not using too much individual cymbal. This may just be accounting for level or just bleeding in a little bit. But generally speaking, you want most of your sound just from the pure overheads. They just end up being very good for that, you know. But then this is the important part. This is what I like to do. So if we were to open up the mixer here, you can sort of see everything I've got going on here. And this is a bit messier than it needs to be because I'm sort of integrating this into a new project. Long story, we do not need to get into that right now. But what I like to do is I like to do what's called summing. So rather than having these individual channels here, let's say we're going to look at the kick. The kick in, kick out. There's no processing there, because what I'd rather do is just sort of pick the sound I want, the blend that I want of those two things. So let's listen to what the... And technically, I think there's some parallel compression going on and bus compression. There's no easy way to listen to this without that, but let's just disable that, disable that. That is the balance I like of the kick in and kick out, and you can sort of mess with those to get whatever flavor you like. And then you start processing. You'll notice that my kick often has the most processing on it because I'm looking for something very specific. Kick and snare need the most work because they're so essential to a metal mix, a rock or metal mix, but they're the things that will get eaten up the most. They're both dead center, fighting for space with everything else. The guitars want to eat into them, especially on the sides. You want to find ways for these things to sort of punch through the mix, for lack of a better term. So, you know, the first thing that you can do is you start with a little bit of compression. I still just absolutely swear by Smash and Grab. I know it's our plugin. The truth is that I did a video like this where I put Smash and Grab on absolutely everything, and it worked so well that that just became my template. And although I think Nolly has moved on from that, Nolly will use a ton of stuff. I'll experiment with stuff, but sometimes I'll just experiment with stuff just not to use this on every channel. But this is kind of my comfort zone plugin because it's so easy to dial in. You know, you've got Smash and Grab mode. Smash mode will be, I believe, a FET mode, which will kind of smash the transients, and Grab is a VCA mode that will be a lot more grabby with the transients, so it'll preserve more of the transients. You can sort of hear the difference there, and we're compressing this quite heavily here. In the Grab mode, it's compressing more. But I'm aiming for -3 to -6 on these, you know? So that's what you have your VU here. You know, this is what you can see your gain reduction here. We have it set to that. And I want a little bit of that. We are using 0% of saturation, 0% of beat. Just kind of just running it pretty clean because we're going to use other plugins for that. Pro Q2, because I guess this is an old EQ from that I just kept adjusting from before I was using Pro Q3, which is now the standard. This isn't even active, this band here. Just delete that. Or was it? Was that active? Oh no, it was active. That was active. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. But generally speaking, you want a bit of this shape here. You want to like these kicks get very boxy around like 200, and you really got to watch it. A lot of stuff could get very boxy around 200 to 300. This is actually sounding like a little bit thuddy right now. We're gonna fix that, but we're gonna. I love this. Just a little cheat code for just a little bit of that low end kick. You want to use some sub with this stuff, right? And then this is just a thing I've been using forever. Just throw some decapitator on it. It's doing two things. It's softening the transients. It's adding a little bit of sustain. There's nothing quite like saturation on a kick. And this is stuff that may sound a little bit harsh. It may sound a little bit intense right now. But what it's doing is it's really helping it cut through the distorted guitars and bass, you know? I was messing around with these two. I really like the Wave Smack Attack. I don't know. I know it's like meant for like electronic stuff, but I just feel like for that little bit more top end click, these are all very small moves. That's why there's a lot of plugins. You'll see we finished this off with a little bit of Pro Q3. Where, I don't know, I guess I felt like I needed a bit of that. Just trying to bring out the kick frequencies, the click. Let's see how that sounds. Oh, and the other thing that we're doing, which is pretty handy, is not there. Kick some. We're feeding this to a parallel compressor. We will get to the parallel compressor at the end because that'll be the best way to take a look at that. If you've seen any of my mix walkthroughs, you'll kind of know. The snare now. Let's take all these plugins off here. And we'll take the reverb. So that's just the raw sound. Again, we have combined the snare top and the snare bottom there. And Smash and Grab, first thing I like to reach for is compression. Again, smashing this one. Aiming for what? -3 to -6, pretty safe zone on all these. You hear the difference there? You hear how much, and this, by the way, this is pretty handy having the drum type kind of does all the back end pro stuff for you. It just makes it a very easy set and forget. I'm not beyond using basic sort of presets like that. It just gets the job done, doesn't it? So as you can hear, you have a lot more transient there. This is smashing it a bit more. And I kind of like that. We're getting a bit more sustain. You know, these are very pokey snares to begin with. And we're going to be softening that out later because this is a technique that Nolly taught me, because Nolly has taught me everything that I know about mixing, and likely you as well. And the approach here is we're going to do what's called top-down mixing. So we are mixing into a master bus, which is going, we'll go over all that stuff. But that right there is doing a lot of the work for softening the transients. So we could go a little bit pokey, and the philosophy behind this is that you end up with a snare that kind of cuts through these very loud source tones that you have going on, by being sort of pokey, and then you're fixing it on the back end with the master bus. If that all sounds a bit weird, it'll make sense when you hear it all come together. The next thing we've got, what have we got here? More compression. This is that Slate Swiss Army knife, and I have it off for some reason. I think I was deciding whether I liked it or not. We can hear it with and without. I'll tell you what, we'll leave this one off, but we'll do it this way. And sometimes I'll experiment with, like, several layers of compression. That can be fun. It can be a character thing. You can extract a bit more sustain. Different compressors will sound different on different source tones. So I highly recommend stacking them sometimes. Just don't go too crazy with it, or you end up with way too much compression. So we have here like a basic sort of corrective EQ. We're adding a little bit of top end. We're getting a little bit of sizzle out here. We're taking out some of the, cutting some of the fat in the middle there. As a general rule, source tones are always a little bit darker and muddier than you would sort of expect them to be, especially if you're referencing against anything sort of modern. So a very easy general thing to do is just a bit of a high shelf, cut some mids. They're both sort of getting you in the same direction. You can be strategic. You can listen for that. Again, these are sort of based around what sounded good to me. We're cutting all this low end out because the snare doesn't really have much information there that's useful. It's just going to crowd the mix. The more that you can cut out, the more space you have to work with. We have another EQ here. I'm sort of discovering what we've done. Again, we're cutting even more mids out. This twin tube processor. This is just this is the was it Plug-in Alliance, the SPL saturator. I like the way this one sounds without it. Again, none of these things are making massive differences. And then again, transient designer, and I really like Smack Attack. Good old waves. As long waves will always have these plugins. I just can't seem, once I start to use them, I can't seem to quit them. But it's good. You have a nice, good collection of plugins. And if you don't have this, there's a number of other transient designers. You can see I was playing around with the SPL one, which is actually a great transient designer in its own right. But I think just for these tones and for what I was going for, kind of preferring this. And I'll do this sometimes where I'll have like these alternate things. I'll turn them off rather than disable them, but they're there to experiment with, and it's kind of a note for later. The toms, there's not a lot of toms in this song, but there's also not a ton of processing going on them. So let's see if we could just loop a little section here. Actually, really happy with the toms on this kit. If we do this, I mean, that is just ideal to me. And the raw sounds are very good. I think there is just some very slight corrective EQ on the toms themselves. These I'm doing on the individual channels because rather than summing, which I am doing here, there's processing I'd like to sum, which I just want all of them. But the basic corrective stuff is going to be specific to each drum. The tuning, the size, the heads, all that will affect what you do. So, this is that's the high tom there. Just rolling off some top end there. But you can see there's not really a lot of work. The floor tom had just a little bit of gunk there, but it's really not that much if we listen without these. You could hear a bit of that gunk there. So just clean these up, get them around the same level, And then again, smash and grab on everything. VCA mode sounds good on this too. This is one of those things where I'd have to listen to the mix to see which one I prefer. But let's try VCA mode just for fun. Again, generally remove some of that gunk. 700, 750 is always like kind of a frequency area that gets a bit gunky. 200, and these are just wide moves here. We're just kind of taking all that stuff out there. A little bit of a shelf because, again, it's not quite as bright as we'd like it to be. A lot of guys will yell at me for using tape saturation. I know Ermin hates it when I use tape saturation on anything, so sorry. I'm really digging this this soft tube one lately. It's very subtle. Again, not a ton of difference. It's a saturator. That's basically what it is. You'll see I'm always reaching for saturation, and that's one of those things where if you're ever like mixing and you're like, okay, individually these sounds sound really good, and the drums soloed sound really good, but then when you're putting it, let's say, especially with distortion, it just sounds like they're in separate worlds. It sounds like they're sitting on top of each other, or they're just not playing nice. I swear saturation is what fixes it. And just a little bit, not a lot. But I don't know if this is the science or the philosophy behind it, but the maybe it's the fact that you have a distorted signal and that you're introducing more distortion. They're sort of playing nice because of that. But I always reach for saturation, and it always just makes it sit a little better, makes everything play real nice. Kind of like it's all in the same room in a way, you know, and you really don't need much. So you'll see I'm using all sorts of different versions of it, whether it's, you know, decapitator, twin tube, tape. You'll reach for different things. One of the things I stopped doing because it was maybe too much of a broad brush stroke for sort of metal is putting these tape saturators on the master bus, which I know Ermin will be very happy that I mentioned because he hates it when people do that. And Nolly, I don't know where Nolly's at on that. Nolly's more easygoing. He's very happy when you just do whatever makes you happy. But I've stopped doing that because it can impart a bit of an EQ. It could do a lot of work that maybe you don't need on the entire mix. But on the toms, very, very happy. I know maybe Nolly will use Saturn. That's another good like sort of distortion saturation plugin. Very customizable. And FabFilter never misses with their plugins, do they? So moving on. Very, very important. Overheads. So if we just get rid of that, you'll notice there's a lot of shells. It's actually not much kick, and that's probably just what I decided to do, is I just didn't want the kick to be. But here's the thing, I'm doing sort of a hyper real thing because I've almost got more, let's see. Well, not quite, but I've got a lot of shells in there. Now, in real life, you kind of have to work with what's getting picked up. You know, the overheads are usually very sensitive condensers, and they're picking up these very, very nice cymbals, which are fairly loud, but it's going to be picking up a lot of shells, especially if your drummer's hitting very hard. There's not really much you can do about that. With our kit, you could do hyper real stuff, you know, and you can go into the cymbal mixer here, and you could literally cut out all the shells, or just put shells, you know, in the rooms and the mono mics. This is the hyper real stuff. I'm not going that far, but that's something you absolutely could mess with if you want to sort of achieve a goal. And remember, there's no wrong way to do this. I'm going for something a bit more realistic, so I'm not going to go nuts with that, but I am sort of pushing in a direction where I'm like, be nice to have a lot of these drums, but no kick in there, right? Why not? That seems to be working well. The other thing that you may notice is, well, first of all, obviously, smash and grab. We have overhead mode. Not a lot of reduction. Just a little bit of glue there, right? Oh, but we are getting a bit of air, and we are cutting a little bit of low end. And this you'll see further reflected in Q3. Really getting rid of the low. And the philosophy here is I kind of want the overheads to be doing cymbals, focusing on shells, but not really adding a lot of low end. It's all the top end. So this is where you're sort of mixing spectrally because everything's sort of fitting together like a puzzle piece, right? Ideally. So this is just a way that I'm approaching this. I always just love listening to overheads. This is not a good example now because I've eliminated the kick, but I feel like any good sample library, like drum sample library, if you program like kind of a realistic sounding beat and you just listen to the overhead, that should convincingly sound like a drummer playing drums. It's always a good test. You should try it. Try it for yourself. Try it on your mix. Like turn everything off, play back your MIDI or your groove or whatever you've got going and listen just to the overhead channel. Tell me that doesn't sound like a drummer just playing, you know? And that's a good start because this is going to be fairly present in your mix and it can help with the realism. So that's fairly simple there. And then the rooms. So the rooms, we have, you know, these I'm feeding in strategically. I'm using the rooms very strategically, and this is where we're going very hyper real. You'll see I don't have a lot of room for the kick, a whole lot for the snare, fair bit for the toms, almost no cymbals. Now that is not realistic right there. In real life, you will have a ton of cymbals, and it's actually one of the reasons that you have to be really careful with rooms in real life because you'll get the shells sounding huge and bombastic and really helping your mix, and the cymbals will just become this wash and it will be unusable. And there's certain rooms that are better about it, certain rooms that are worse. For example, I used to think that like the biggest room ever would be the best thing because, oh man, your drums will just sound so huge and you get all this natural reverb, and that's true. But the cymbals become such a wash that you can't even get those levels sometimes to be high enough overall to where you can't even use that room sound. So this is where we're actually really strategic about not only the rooms that we pick, but the mics that we pick, where they're placed, the size of the rooms. And some of the rooms are not shaped the way that you would expect them to be, but it's always strategic so that we can sort of maximize what we can get. You know, for the sample library, it's fine, but when we're doing the drums for the album, we don't have this level of control. But what I'm doing here is just not feeding a lot of cymbals, so problem solved. So your room sound can sound like that, which is great. And what's even better is that when we go here, you know, you'll see not one but two instances of smash and grab. This is something I've been playing around with. Absolutely smashing this. Absolutely smashing this, you know. This. And you know, we have it on the room setting there, so... Actually, let's turn all of these off so you can hear it. Just this. I mean, here was it. And it's bringing up a lot of level too, right? Then I have another instance here in grab mode. And you'll notice this is on snare. That's on purpose. I just like the way it sounded. And we're just getting a little bit. We're not running that one as hard, but I just like the way it sounded. And then Q3 is just removing all this low end. We don't want that low end. You know, this is just trying to be honest, I'm really just trying to get the snare out of this. And I'm sort of putting everything else in because if it wasn't in there, it would sound a bit too separate. So it's just to glue that stuff together. But that's sort of how I set the levels. I didn't set this in isolation like this, which is why it probably sounds a little weird. So yeah. Ooh. All right, on to parallel compression. So here, this if you don't know, we've been over this a few times. Let's just go over it really quickly. I am feeding a bunch of my channels, these various amounts here, to my parallel compression channel, which then I have not one, but two instances again of parallel compression, or of compression. And the parallel part is just because I'm bringing up this level here. So, like, if I was to turn it all the way down, And what this is just a compressor that's running quite hard. In this case, really 2. This is the beauty about having this sort of effects channel that you can send to, is you can put whatever you want on it. I've got an EQ going that's working with me as well. So. But what we want out of this is we've been sort of ending up with source tones that have very strong transients, a lot of attack, but not necessarily a ton of sustain. Now you could fix that on the individual channels, or you could have this sort of parallel compression channel where you're feeding what you want to it, and that just is set for a lot of sustain. So without it, you have the kick and the snare just sort of disappearing behind the mix. Now you can hear both of those things are blooming through, and that's that extra sustain that we're getting. I'm sure it's adding a little bit of attack, but for some reason my listen control isn't working right now, because we might be able to listen to just what it's doing, but this is everything combined. And similar to that, I have, you know, and one thing to note, feeding mainly kick and snare and toms. Or actually, the toms don't seem to be going to that, so put that in there. That sounds better. Let's do it without it. Bring it down just a bit. Very cool. And then the overheads, I don't really have a lot. Again, it's one of those glue situations where I just, you know. I just feel like it pumps the tiniest bit and just plays nice with the whole energy of the mix. And feeding quite a bit of room, because the room's fine if that gets... Just kind of gives you a bit more of that compressed room sound, which we have a ton of compression on. We're doing a very similar thing with the reverb channel here, except here, no, not really. I just have the snare. This is kind of an extension of Nolly's technique, which is, yeah, I'm using this this Brainworks thing here. So let's listen to just what it sounds like. And if we were to disable, and it's not what you might expect, right? I mean, I don't know what you were expecting, but I might have even thought like, oh, you're going to go for something with like a very long tail. I actually want something that's quite short, but that sort of blooms and expands. Because what I feel like without this is... Again, I feel like the snare is being eaten by the mix. You're hearing it, you're hearing the sustain, you're hearing all that, but it's just getting eaten. So I want something where it just can sort of push through. And it's not the initial transient, it's everything sort of after that. And that's where I kind of like the way this sounds. You hear the difference? It's subtle, and you can adjust the level here, but let's listen from here. And as you'll notice, and I've said this a lot in every walkthrough I've done, these are very small changes, but every little small change, I don't know, that's the way I like to approach it. There's nothing I'm doing that's making any one thing that's making one massive change. It's always just small nudges in the direction that I'd like to go. And that's just the way that I like to approach it. You know, I wasn't always doing this, but I've kind of been getting into this, doing some drum bus processing. All right, so I realized something in setting this up. I didn't even set this up correctly. So what I have been doing is I've been messing with this drum bus. It turns out that I just had my kick going to this this Chandler, which actually sounded really good. And when I routed everything, it was changing everything a lot. And now I don't like it anymore. I could probably dial it in, but I don't want to take forever to do this. This is the plugin I was using before, which is this Brainworks VSC2. Vertigo VSC2, and I quite like it. I'm running it very lightly. Using the 90 hertz side chain there. and quite fast. Just a little bit of ratio here, 2 to 1. It is making everything extra punchy. But hey, you can hear me dial something in. I kind of like that. It needs to be dialed in a little more. It is making the cymbals a little bit too grabby right now, but that could be easily fixed. I could adjust the compression on the channel itself. Maybe there's too much going to the parallel compression. Sounding generally pretty good there. Right there, I mean, that's those are basically that's the drum processing right there. And if we were to go to the tubas here real quick, because I said, you know, that's what we're mixing into. If we were to disable that, that's gonna make a massive difference. So let's go through this real quick. I've done this a bunch of times, but you're here with me now, so might as well do this, right? Again, the general philosophy. We never have quite as much low end as we'd like. We have a little bit too much mids and never as much top end. So just, you know, that's your first serve. If this were tennis, it's like, all right, there we go. You know, I absolutely adore this compressor. This is the Slate SSL. One thing I really like is that it's got a high pass filter sidechain, which is just a fancy way of saying that it'll ignore the frequencies, you know, below 74 hertz in this case. What that does is it means it's mostly reacting to like strong transients and signals from the snare, toms, and things like that. As you can see, the snare is what's really sending it into like proper gain reduction. The kick's just doing a little bit, and that can be adjusted here. But there'll be a spot where it just makes a lot of sense, right? This is a mid-side thing. Again, the general philosophy is the sides. So this is where you have your EQ affecting the side signals separately from the mono center signal. So the mono center signal can have all the low end. I'm taking a little bit out here. I guess I thought that needed that. And the sides, we really don't need low end in the sides, and that will make it brighter. Remember, wherever you're removing accents all the other stuff. So that's a way to make it brighter. So the mix gets a lot clearer, but what's cool is that we're just affecting the parts that we want. We're not doing this wholesale EQ on everything. Where we are doing that, well, sort of, is in all these magic EQ. You can feel free to take this. Now, this is a slightly different idea where you're EQing the left side and the right side a little bit different. Nolly always said this to me because he was just like, yeah, it makes it have more character. I mean, ultimately, what you are hearing is there's a bit of a shelf here, there's a bit low end, and we are cutting largely here, right? So it just makes everything quite a bit brighter. This I've been playing with, this mastering EQ, this dangerous mastering EQ. Just getting like a touch more low end out of it. I like the way it sounds, to be honest. It's very, these mastering EQs are very sort of subtle with their controls. But I like it. And then good old Pro L for loudness and for chopping transients. So you'll notice without this, hear how pokey that snare is, hear how pokey kind of everything is. Well, and it's also stopping us from clipping, which we were doing before. So it's chopping the transients, as you can see here. And we are setting this based off of what sounds good. We want a generally good level, but I want there to be this glue and interaction happening. So but I don't want it to pump too much. anyways, that is the approach to the mix for the drums with the P5 library. I find these samples to be really friendly to work with. Like they're such pure sounds. They just have a lot of good character to them. They're very clean. You know, one thing that we didn't really have to mess with here is any of the turbo stuff, and that we can play around with in another mix walkthrough. So that is, you know, these are built-in controls that a lot of the processing that I'm doing here could be just done in the box. I figured if you wanted to see this way, the more natural way to do things, well, now you know how to do it. But this turbo control is extremely powerful, and it can be set for each channel, like every single one of these channels individually. And it will kind of mess up my mix right now if I put it on, because it'll be just too much. It's like a double dose of processing there. But that is a wonderful little tool. If you're not using it, you have these very, very, very unprocessed source tones that you can then shape to be whatever you want, really. And that's the beauty of these sort of full kits like that. And that's the philosophy behind these kits, is that if you don't really know what you're doing, you have our MIDI groove libraries. You have turbo controls on this, and you can, you know, you don't have to do multi-out, and you can kind of get going. But if you are more of a pro user, or you're becoming more of a pro user, hopefully you're watching some of these videos like this and you're learning a bit more. It's encouraging you to dive a little bit deeper. Well, we have these tools that are built in, or you could just say, you know what, I'm going to do all the processing on my own. And you could just copy everything that I showed you here today. All right, here's a little bit of bonus stuff in case you want to just see some, this is a little cool guitar trick. This is something a little bit late to the game. Probably a lot of you guys are doing this. I thought it was so cool. I'm kind of embarrassed I haven't been doing this sooner. So I'm using plugins for the guitars here. I'll show you something. So let's say we take these. These are just DIs. Fantastic, right? Now, what I used to do in the past was I would put, you know, my plugins on here. And I really like putting either Zilla or Kali or, you know, just some IR pack. I really like our IR packs. I always go for Zilla or Kali personally. And that would give you one instance per channel. But not only does this make it neater, and not only do you need less processing, but you can do something super handy, which is you can adjust stuff on a double tracked setup. And as we talked about earlier, that's super useful because the tones that you would be dialing in on the center or side by side or whatever will be a little bit different than what you're going to want to hear in the mix. So what I've done is I've routed these to a group channel here, which is why you're hearing both of them. And then I am running Granifier because I really do like this plugin in stereo mode. And that sounds like that, which is terrible. But then we've got Zilla here, which also just runs in stereo mode. And then what's handy about this is that now you can just adjust this, and it's affecting both sides at once. You don't have to go into each plugin and do that. And you only need one plugin. You're having the plugin, so it's a win-win there. Very, very happy with this. I don't know why I haven't done this sooner, but it's super handy. The IRs that come with this are great, but nothing really beats the Zilla and Kali cabs for me. So the fact that these also run in stereo and that you could just run this straight through. And just hear how it affects it in real time, you know, or in a mix, you know. Very cool, right? So just figured I should show you that as well. And since we are here, let's see. I messed up the guitar tone a little bit. I don't remember where it was. Whatever. Close enough. Let's take a quick look at what we got on the guitar bus. Nothing too crazy. Again, generally, this gets you most of the way there. So what I want out of the guitar bus, so everything's routed there. I've got all that and the layers routed. The one thing I really want is just to make it play nice. It's always about making space. Guitars are some of the most unfriendly source tones that you have in a mix. So how do we make it play nice? Well, all right. What do I've got here? I've got three really cool. I love Virtual Mix Rack. We've got their custom equalizer. I think each band is from a different mixer. We've got our SSL and our Neve. Because why not have all three, right? And here we are, just adding a little 4K, which we were then subsequently removing on the on the SSL. The top end of this is really smooth, and sometimes I find it's easy to get carried away with like cutting too much top end out of the guitar. So I'm trying to add a little bit more, which I know Mark Lewis will be very happy about because he thinks everything's too dull. But that may be because he's deaf. Just kidding. And the Neve bands here, they're very sensitive, so you don't really need a whole lot. But looks like we're cutting like quite a bit. And you know, the guitars, the mid range just adds up so quickly. The actual cab I'm using here is kind of interesting. We can talk about that for a quick second. I'm doing an off-axis 57, which is a throwback to something that I used to go for this kind of sound, like an off-axis 57 on a vintage 30. I thought it sounded really cool with the Super Fat Boy. So this is not really the setup I normally use, but I was like, let's see how we get this to work. And it's pretty cool. It just kind of, it's like a little throwback to how I used to approach things back in the day. Let's get back to the guitar bus. The next thing, got Q3 here. Again, we're just cutting all that mid. And I am taking a lot of this top end out, but it's at 11. It's just smoothing out a little bit. I don't want it to be too harsh. I don't want these to rip my ears apart, right? This is a trick I like to do where I'm going to take the snare. This is not the sneap trick. The sneap trick is to do a multi-band, like just kind of here. And this is kind of handy. See what's happening there? So what it's doing is it's just targeting the low frequencies, because when you're palm muting, all of a sudden you have this rush of low mids, right? And it can get very woofy. And it can, more importantly, overwhelm your mix. Now this is very extreme. We don't really need that much. But, so bring the range though. Just kind of doing this by ear. But this, we want to just kind of, every time it detects a bit of low end from that palm mute, even it out. And that way, the whole mix is consistent. You're not having these spikes in low mids every time you palm mute. Keep in mind that's going to eat over the kick, the bass. It's just going to create more space if you do this. So that's the Andy Sneap trick. Very handy. Might have gone a little bit too heavy on it because I did dial the mix in. There we go. That sounds good. Dial it in for the mix. The next thing we can do is we can just add this like band of like 500 here. Let's play around with this. You don't need, again, you don't need to go nuts with this stuff. You know, unlike with electronic music where you're hearing the side chaining actually going, here you don't want to hear the effect. You just want to hear the effect of the effect. You want to hear things punch through without actually having to bring them up in volume. So this is where little tricks like this can be handy, as long as it works. So what we got to do is we got to find our snare sum, right? That is the correct snare sum. There should be, here, we'll just take this level here. And hopefully that will work. Then here we're going to select external sidechain. It's very strange that it's not working. I don't know why. Oh wait, maybe that's why. There we go. There we go. You have to activate it there. See, it drops as soon as the snare drum kicks in. So the idea here is that there's a lot of these sort of muddy frequencies around 500. You can do this with wherever you want. Do it by ear, right? And it doesn't need to be a wide band. But every time, so this lower band, and again, multi-band EQing is or compression is great because you're basically EQing off of by using compressor, by compressing these frequencies, not the whole range like we've been doing with compressors so far, but just these frequencies. So when it detects too much low end, it brings the volume just of those frequencies down. So now we're telling it, hey, bring just these frequencies down, not the whole guitar track down like you could do just with a regular sidechain compressor, but we're multi-band sidechaining so that we're going to take just these frequencies down, and rather than reacting to the guitars where there's not really going to be much change or much to react to, we're going to react to the snare drum. Why? Because I think they're fighting for space, you know, and I want to make a bit more space for the snare drum. So I'm going to put it in this frequency range, and, you know, enough range that every time it hits, you're going to see that drop. See that? And you're not going to hear this effect. You're just going to, what you should hear is just the snare cut through a bit more. We're having it happen so quickly, attacking and releasing back so quickly that you shouldn't hear it. But I like this as a little trick to actually, this is a little guitar trick to make the guitars just get out of the way of every snare. Anything to get more punch. I might do something similar sometimes with the kick drum and the bass guitar, where I'll multi-band sidechain, you know, the frequencies where those guys are fighting, and those are both in the center channel. It's not really necessary here. This is, you know, this video is going to just be forever long if we just keep going with this stuff. But I hope that this has all been useful. These are all my little tips and tricks. It's everything that I know how to do. You know, if anything here has helped your mix out, let me know in the comments. I'd really like to know if this was useful. If there's anything more that you'd like me to expand on, if this was useless, let me know as well. Could save me some more time. I'll do shorter videos. But sorry for rambling so long, and thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys soon.